Here follows an extract from my book Artful Designs, available from Amazon. Chapter 22, Part 1. Beth had particularly asked that the Historical Stitching Society be allowed to meet at the gallery, and had asked her brother to accompany her in asking members to attend. Benedict had particularly reassured people that there was no cause for alarm, and stipulated that life must carry on as best it could under the circumstances. He explained that a couple of policemen would be present as a token of reassurance, and the security guard would also be on duty. However, a group of people sitting sewing could not present any danger, and so it would be a shame if they didn't meet as usual. Benedict and Beth sat in Conrad's study as Beth explained that she hoped that both Conrad and Hyacinth would come to the group. Indeed, she was counting on Hyacinth to host the refreshments at break time, and knew that Hyacinth would appreciate Conrad joining her. As they chatted, Beth looked at Conrad's art collection and asked him to explain them to her. "Would you please bring that little abstract to the group when you come?" asked Beth. "I've been trying to explain a particular effect to the group, and that perfectly illustrates my idea." Conrad agreed to bring the artwork, and Beth and her brother left soon afterwards. "Did you notice that all the other works are extremely large?" said Beth. "That's because Jefferson has everything large. It's how he shows off," said Benedict. "Oh, you do talk nonsense," said Beth. "Now, take me to Scott's house, please." Mrs. Malkin was pleased to see Beth until she saw that she was accompanied by her brother. "Take no notice of Benji," said Beth. "He's not here in his official capacity, so don't mind him. He can't help being a policeman, so you'll have to be kind to him." Mrs. Malkin laughed nervously. She didn't like to think that she could be unkind to anybody, and so diligently fought her fear and prejudice. "I've come to ask you if you'll come to our little stitching group," said Beth. Seeing a cross-stitch sampler over the fire, she walked over to admire it. "Did you work this?" Mrs. Malkin blushed with pride. "I did, many years ago. I haven't done any sewing for years. It's funny how you forget to pick up a needle, isn't it?" Beth chatted on about sewing and art, and was soon shown that other than a few photographs of Scott, there were no other pictures in the house. "Would you bring this with you when you come?" Beth asked. "It's always good to see other people's work. I'd like to show the others." Mrs. Malkin said that she wasn't sure if her sewing was up to scrutiny, but hadn't the strength to withstand Beth's gentle but persevering insistence. After that, Beth felt that she'd exerted her influence as far as was necessary, and left her brother to tell Scott that his presence was also required. When Scott asked James what on earth he was up to, dragging his mother along to the gallery, James at least had the decency to admit that he hadn't a clue. Of course, it was explained that Theo would open up the gallery and would remain for the duration of the evening. He'd been itching to get inside to get some work done, and so he jumped at the chance. "What exactly do you want me to do, Beth?" asked James. "You can't call everyone to a sewing club and give me no idea what you're up to." "I told you that the Constable will be hidden in plain sight, if it's hidden at all. You can't issue a warrant without sufficient evidence, but I might be able to give you a starting point. If my plan fails dismally, we'll only have lost an evening, so it's not so bad. But if I'm right in following a hunch, then you'll need to have your men on standby," said Beth. "I think I can manage that," said Benedict. "Can't you give me anything more solid to go on?" "I have nothing more solid in my own mind. Nevertheless, I have a feeling that this might just work," said Beth. "Have you got clearance to bring Finn along?" "Yes, that's all sorted," James nodded. "And we've done a cursory search throughout the museum, but nothing fitting your description has been seen. We'll keep looking, though." Beth didn't appear concerned at this lack of progress. "There's nothing more we can do until tomorrow night," said Beth. "If all of this is a complete mistake, then I can only apologise. Even so, you should pick up a few tips on cross-stitch and tent stitch." "Every day's a school day," said Benedict. The usual group continued working on the acanthus pattern, and Mrs. Malkin looked on in undisguised admiration. "How could you let me bring my little cross-stitch and put it next to this wonder?" she said, looking accusingly at Beth. "Nonsense," said one of the stitchers. "The technique is just the same. It's all in the design, and that isn't of our making here. We're just working on a bigger scale. Cross-stitch is very hard wearing, so it's aptly suited to a larger scale work like this." They then turned the design over and started to explain the structure of the stitch. "I was always taught that it was rude to look at the back of someone's sewing," said Beth. "My mother always taught me that the back of your sewing should be as neat as the front," said Mrs. Malkin. "In fact, when I had this sampler framed, it was mounted inside out at first until I told them of their mistake." Mrs. Malkin actually beamed with pride. Beth saw the opportunity that she'd been waiting for and seized the moment. "Can you show us?" Beth asked. "We're in an art gallery, so all of the tools and skills are to hand to mount it back again. Do you mind?" Mrs. Malkin evidently did not mind and handed the framed embroidery to Beth, glowing with pleasure. Drew began to grasp what Beth's plan was and jumped into the conversation. "If Scott hasn't yet learned how to stretch a canvas, then I'll have something to say about it," said Drew. "Scott can dismantle it and then re-stretch the fabric." Scott came forward unsure of what was expected of him. Mrs. Malkin actually giggled excitedly at the prospect of showing off her neat stitching and also giving her son the chance to showcase his newfound skills with canvas pliers. The group of stitchers were surprised at the turn their evening was taking, but were more than happy to go with the flow and explore the mechanics of sewing and framing. There was an atmosphere of openness as members held up their stitching to be examined for neatness. Once the frame was dismantled, there was no doubt that Mrs. Malkin's stitching was the neatest so far. Conrad began to sense that something deeper was afoot and eyed the group suspiciously. The stitchers were unaware of the tension in the room, as they themselves were too absorbed in the topic of stitch tension. "Scott's doing a grand job of restretching his mother's embroidery, Conrad. Let's give him a go on your painting," said Drew. "It's an original. I don't want it mucking about with," said Conrad. "Don't be so nervous. There are trained art conservationists here. Let the lad have a bit of apprenticeship experience," said James. "What on earth for?" said Conrad. The atmosphere was charged now, and it could explode with just a spark. Finn was getting edgy too, but a look from James kept him rooted to the spot. As if oblivious to it all, Beth carried on with her stitching inspection. "Theo, you've got my embroidery here, haven't you? You were framing it. I want to show the ladies my stitching technique. Can I have it back a moment, please?" said Beth. "I think it's here somewhere, but I don't know where. I haven't been here for days, so I can't think where it is just now," said Theo. "Please go and find it. I really want to show it here," said Beth. "I'll go in a minute, but I've already stapled it to the stretcher bars." Picking up the undertones of what was expected of him, Conrad took up his painting and, throwing caution to the wind, thrust it on Scott. "Go on then. If you're having a workshop, you might as well have a go at this. It's an original Kandinsky, so go gently, won't you?" said Conrad. By this point, Conrad was almost removing the canvas from the frame himself. He looked at James and shrugged his shoulders. It was obvious that he had no real idea what was going on, but nevertheless guessed what was required of him. Scott looked terrified at having to perform to such an audience on an original, but endeavoured to do as he was bidden. "Don't worry, I'll help you with this one," said Drew reassuringly. "I know we're all a bit on edge being here at the gallery," said Beth. "Benji will go with you to find the embroidery, Theo." Swept along by the tide, Theo went in search of the embroidery and brought it back to the group. For the full book of Artful designs, available in paperback or as an ebook, follow the link in the cards in the description box or find details on my website at sharonbill.com. Thanks for listening.